Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm Brandon Starr, and this is episode 252 of CryptoBiography. And I'm calling this one In Between. And here we go. Well, this is obviously being called In Between because we're in between two of our stories. The last one, Isle of Bronze, we just wrapped up. And it's funny, given how long the episode, or that story was, 17 parts, I didn't have any sort of follow-up last week, and I thought I'd do it this week. I am working on the next story. However, between doing Utini cast and then also having some other things come up, and then on Friday I got my second booster, which meant Saturday I just felt bad, which I kind of was expecting, but I was hoping it wouldn't happen, but it did. I'm still kind of recovering from it, but I feel mostly fine today. And I'm really excited about the next story. It's not going to be nearly as long, but I like the idea behind it. But let's do a little wrap up on the Isle of Bronze. I remember saying before I started Isle of Bronze that I was, it could end up being a very, very long work. And it could have. And in many ways it did. I actually did, in a lot of ways, I did a lot more prep work for that story than I have for pretty much anything else story-wise. I always, for the longer stories, I almost always have some sort of background hashed out, some, character sketching, just a little bit. But this one, I actually did quite a bit for. I actually wrote, a whole mythology, some of which got touched on in the story, and some of which, just never did. It never came up, but it's there, and just sort of as backgrounding, which I think is more or less the right way to do something like that. And I also thought that was sort of appropriate, because what I knew had to happen with this story is I knew it was going to be the story of a culture that gets ended, like the end of a culture, like and especially the end, not only of this kingship, but I knew that the entire island was essentially doomed. They were a bronze mining culture that at a time when iron was starting to take over, and essentially it was inevitable that they would be wiped out. And I knew that going in. That was sort of the point of writing this. I thought it would go a lot longer, and I could have written it in such a way that it did go a lot longer. I could have made it, full novel length potentially. But in the back of my head, I always knew that what I should watch for was the point where it made sense that someone who was now more powerful than them, because of course we set up the background of it where they have a well-defended island, and because they had bronze and lots of it, which was the right metal to have for a long time, they simply had been able to fortify themselves and be protected. And instead, now that iron has come around, there are bigger and bigger powers, and they have better and better weapons, and all of their weapons are better than the bronze armor and weapons that this island would have. And so I knew that was going to be the end of the story, essentially, when someone takes, when someone who has iron weapons and armor takes notice of them enough to actually bother to go and conquer them. And so I was watching for the moment when it made sense for this to happen. And, it happened in some ways a little earlier than I thought, but once I kind of saw what it made sense to happen, it was yep, that's right. The Assyrians took notice of the Limas Island and the fact that that they were helping Thebes, and that they were they probably had also figured out they were sending emissaries to other places, and they were just going to come and take them out. And I wanted the story to feel a little bit like an untold story. This is like properly, this is a story that never gets told in history. Like lots of little nations, lots of little tribes, lots of little cultures have gotten wiped out over time. All over the world, but especially, I would say, especially in sort of like the around the Mediterranean. They get conquered, especially back then. This is several hundreds of years BCE, and they just go away. And if they didn't leave a lot of writing behind, sometimes very little of them is known. Sometimes nothing of them is known. Like I'm sure their entire, like, smallish but entire cultures that have been just completely lost to history. And maybe some, maybe of course someday some of those will, enough of them will be found to sort of figure something out about them. But basically, that's the kind of story I was trying to tell. Like, what was it like to live through one of these, live and die in one of these times when, you have a culture, it's got hundreds of years, it's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's got its own mythology, its own way of doing things, and I did make sure that that they were sort of like unusual in certain aspects, and and then what happens when a culture like that just finally gets wiped out, like just goes away. And it's obviously a tragedy, but it was interesting to write, and I hope you enjoyed it too. When it comes to the next story, I obviously I don't like giving things away, but I'm really excited about it. Should be much shorter. Like this next one's not going to be very long, I don't think, at all. I am looking forward to writing. It could even be a one-parter. I mean, it could be that short. But I've only kind of just started on it. Like I said, once I started feeling bad, I knew I was never going to make it. So I didn't try to push it and make myself feel worse. But I've got more or less the story outlined in my head. I know roughly what's going to happen, and I'm really excited about it. It's sort of an idea that I haven't done a search on it or anything on Google, but I don't know of any story that's taken quite this idea and run with it. So hope you enjoy it. We'll be looking forward to that next week. And if you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, cryptobiography@gmail.com, or hit me up on Facebook or Twitter. And thanks for listening. Words and music, copyright 2022, CryptoBiography LLC. All rights are reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.